Hello and welcome. Thank you for listening. My guest today is a veteran of news that has worked at several major radio stations for nationally syndicated newscasts throughout her career and has served as news director and news anchor, as well as a news writer and producer. This is a long episode, so let's just get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, Molly Paige. DJ, roll that music. Molly, I do want to just thank you for taking some time and having a conversation with me, having a good old chat. I know that during these times you can't meet face to face for things like this, for example, because I do like my podcast to be a little bit more intimate, face to face, having a conversation like that. But through the power of technology, we're having this conversation today. So thank you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And thank you for inviting me on. And, we'll do another one when we can go eat food.
Exactly. Yeah, I definitely miss those days when you just go in any place you want. You don't really have to make a reservation ahead of time and just go in and have some fun. Like I was just telling my wife the other day, man, I'm kind of missing going to a bar and just having a beer with friends and whatnot and just chatting it up. But how are you holding up during this pandemic?
Well, I might be one of a very few people who have lost weight during it. That seems to be the thing. The advertisers are all bombarding us now with all the different ways we can lose weight before we go out in public from being home and having the munchies. But I've actually lost 20 pounds during this.
Oh, man. Well, that's excellent. I think I gained those 20 pounds.
Really? Well, that proves that you and Claire can cook. See, I can't cook. So I'm stuck at home with, cold cereal. So that's really, if you had to eat my cooking, you'd lose 20 pounds too. But yeah, I'm a bit of an introvert anyway. And the last couple of jobs I've worked from home, even when I was broadcasting on 4 radio stations. So it's not a big deal for me, but there are little things. I miss seeing people smile, under their masks. When you see little kids, they can't tell if you're smiling at them or not. There are little things like that. And certainly, going out to a pub and having a Guinness, I miss that. So I hope that's all coming back.
Yeah, that's actually my favorite type of beer, Guinness.
Is it?
Yes,
Oscar,
I love it.
I knew I liked you. Does Claire like Guinness as well?
Not really, which is unfortunate. I mean, she'll have a taste, but I've never actually seen her drink an entire pint of Guinness.
More for you.
Yeah, I love it because it's just so, it feels so creamy and the taste is good for a dark beer. I've had other stouts and other dark type of beers and I don't know. I've always, it's always left some kind of bad taste in my mouth. I mean, it's just kind of hard for me to drink the dark beers, but leave it to Guinness. They make some really good beer.
I really think we could live on Guinness. If we do, it's like I love it. I can't. There is no other beer for me. I have a friend who I used to go to the pub with, and he's Irish. He's from Ireland, and since he's been at home, he's been drinking something called Carlsberg. I think it's Carlsberg, and I tried it, and it's awful. I'm sorry, Carlsberg, the maker of Carlsberg, but there is nothing that compares to Guinness. There is no other dark beer. It's the only thing I like to drink.
Yeah, no, it's so delicious, especially when you pair it with something else. I actually, this is the great thing about what's I'm very optimistic about April because April I think is going to be a really good month. We're already seeing a lot of places reopen, and LA County actually just went into the red tier, which is less restrictive than what it was before, and now they're allowing some indoor dining. But one of the things that ended up happening with the reopening was that these pubs have I mean, and thank goodness for St. Patrick's Day that I like to call it just St. Patty's now. But these local bars near me opened up, and I decided, you know what, I know I can't have this big old celebration like I've had in previous years for St. Patty's Day, so I'm just gonna go and have a beer and have a burger or whatever, and so I did, and this particular pub was. Seating outdoors, not really indoors yet, but I was there early enough because I work an overnight shift. But I was there early enough that I got a great parking spot and a great place to sit on the patio. And I just had my Guinness, and they were served. They had a St. Patty's specific menu that you could order from, and they weren't going to deviate from that. So only you could only order from that menu. But I mean, it was a lot of fun. Just going there wearing green, having a good old St. Patty's Day. But what did you do anything fun during St. Patty's Day this year?
I didn't. I'm still a little cautious about everything. And first of all, I love your podcast, Hangry Mexican.
Thank you.
You talk about all the wonderful things, in the area and places to go out and wonderful food to eat. And it's very sensory how you do it. Especially when you talk about French fries, it's phenomenal. Which, by the way, couples with Guinness beautifully. I went over to a friend's backyard, my Irish friends, and we just sat across a huge wooden table in their backyard outside and had, I don't think I've ever made it through a third Guinness. I can usually get through one or two, and then I set my aspirations very high and I start on the third. But I've never made it through the bottom. But it was just nice to be out with friends a little bit, and even in a backyard.
Oh, excellent! What a lot of people may not know about Guinness is that you're totally right when you said it could be a meal, because it is creamy, and it does fill you up. So that's all.
And it has a lot of vitamins and minerals. There's a lot of nutritional value in that glass.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yes.
It's and there's a lot of cool stuff about Guinness, and that's why it's my favorite beer.
Yes, it changes your outlook as well.
But no, I mean, I'm glad to hear that at least you had some type of activity going on. I know that a lot of us have been cautious throughout this time, and I mean, I even started double masking. I went to Costco and I got these surgical masks. They were I think 50 pack for $10, and so I just got them, and I've been using them on top of my cloth mask. I mean, I just kind of feel like, hey, we're near the finish line here. I don't want to do anything that's gonna kill that momentum. If I'm gonna finish, let me finish strong, and I'm hoping that by late April, or like the current administration said, May 1st, I'll be able to qualify or be eligible to get a vaccine shot. So I'm just waiting on that.
I don't mean to get really personal here, but how often do you wash your cloth masks?
I do it twice. I mean, I have so many. When the pandemic started, I didn't have any masks, and so I would just stay home all the time. And a relative of mine sent couple masks and kind of started on that. And then all of a sudden, and I kind of knew this was going to happen, I just had a feeling, but a lot of these companies started making their own masks. So I saw Lucky Brands making masks. Old Navy came out with their line of masks. I mean, you could now I think a lot of businesses, a lot of big brands are making masks, which is awesome. But because I got so many from all these companies, I am able to, if I want to, really, I can just use the mask once and that's it. But most of the time, my trips are so short that I use that mask 2 or 3 times. And by short, I mean just going out and picking up food and coming back. Right. But if I'm going out and going to be out there for a few hours, like, now that things are reopening, if I'm out dining, in the patio of a business, of a restaurant, and I know I'm going to be there for a while, and my mask is kind of all over the place. I mean, I try and keep it in my pocket, but even then, I hate touching my mask so many times.
Right.
So when I get home, I just discard that and get a new one next time I go out. So if I know I'm going to be out prolonged periods of time, I use it once. If it's just a very short trip, just going out, picking something and then coming right back, then I use it 2 or 3 times and then discard that. And I have a little shoe box that I put all the so-called dirty masks in there. And then I just once that box gets full, I just throw it into the washing machine and just wash those things.
Oh, that's a good way to do it. Yeah. Most of the masks I have are cotton. I get like the organic cotton ones. And if I'm just wearing it to a trip out, I'll usually, the hand sanitizer that you can get from Trader Joe's or something that smells like lavender and it's got like 70% alcohol in it, I'll spray the mask down and then just leave it in my car. So the alcohol is going to kill anything that's on it. And then after I wear it a couple times, then I'll do a wash. I know we have to have the disposable ones, but I'm a little worried about those ending up in the ocean.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah. So I know there's going to be a lot of, we had to get through the pandemic. We had to do whatever we had to do to get through the pandemic, but there's going to be a lot of plastic and trash that we have to figure out what to do with at the end of this. And I hope, the folks looking after our oceans can sort that out.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some really good masks out there, but I've seen some really expensive ones, and I'm really a fan of the Lucky brands as well as Old Navy. Old Navy's, I think, are really inexpensive. But what I like about Lucky brands in particular is that their masks are not only fashionable, but they have either the holes are super small or they just have no holes. It's still breathable, which is excellent, but you don't see any light go through. And that's a really good sign for me to pick masks, because I have some masks that I don't even wear because I hold it up to the light and you can see the light just coming through the mask. And to me, if I see that, then most likely something else is going to get in.
Yeah, I agree. The ones that I have are pretty thick. They're cotton and they're about the consistency of a really thick t-shirt, like one of those hefty t-shirts. So when you hold it up, there's not much going through there. And that's definitely something to look for.
Yeah, exactly. But just kind of pivoting a little bit, I looked you up online because I wanted to see what you've been up to, because I know that you've been doing radio for a while, and so currently are you doing Saturday? What was it called? Saturday was with the Beatles.
Oh, I do. I'm very, very fortunate. Les Perry has been hosting this show on 88.5 here in Los Angeles for 20 years, and he does this show from 9 o'clock in the morning until noon. And it's Saturday with the Beatles. Great show because he handpicks everything that's played. There's no commercials. And he asked me to do some of the voice liners that go in between the Beatles songs. And even though I do voiceovers, I never like hearing my own voice. And it's the only time I've ever listened, because I listen to the show as a fan, and I don't mind my own voice because it's surrounded by the Beatles. So everybody's going to sound good. So yeah, I've been doing that for, I guess, a couple of years now. And yeah. So it's fun.
Yeah. That's what do you like about radio?
Well, what's left of it. It's not, if someone was talking to me today about getting into radio, and I've been news director of a couple of radio stations. And when we have interns in, I said this probably 7 years ago, it's not going in the right direction, radio, with the FCC deregulation. that started under Reagan, continued with Clinton. Most of the radios have been bought up by just a handful of owners, and they have cut a lot of jobs. There are very few jobs left where you can make a living. Now, there's some where you can make a really good living, but that's like going into acting, going, well, Tom Cruise did it. So it's, I would say, I had the option of doing television or radio, and I was so shy back when I made that decision many years ago. I chose radio, and I love radio because you get to engage your imagination more with it. And it seemed like there was a lot more freedom. And since I haven't just done news, I started out doing music radio as a DJ, and at jazz stations, at rock stations, started out in Santa Barbara. Radio seemed like it was more creative at the time. You could still choose your own music that you wanted to play. And I love doing interviews, and I've, gotten to interview Willie Nelson one-on-one, sit down with Willie Nelson and his wife, and Peter Frampton, and, really interesting people. So I've had that opportunity, and that part of it's been good. The bad part is that you always have to conform yourself to their format, which podcasting's really opened up for people to express themselves and do whatever they want and go as long as they want. And you don't have to adhere to guidelines and timelines and things like that.
Yeah, no, you're totally right, because that's one of the reasons why I got into podcasting, just so that I could kind of make up my own rules in a sense. I've done podcasting for larger TV stations, and they always seem to drop the ball on something. And to me, well, okay, this is one of the things, and I think it goes back to radio, where everything has to just sound so perfectly. And with my podcast, I just didn't want that. I wanted the authenticity of that person, of that guest that comes on, as well as for me. And so you'll hear all the ums and and whatever comes out. I stumble on my own words sometimes. Well, a lot of the times, and to me, it's totally fine. And there's no one that is gonna. I'm not going to get in trouble for it. I don't have anybody to answer to for that. And with other things, it gets, at least for me, it gets really boring when you just have to follow the same formula time and time again. But one of the reasons that I love news is, back when in Santa Barbara, I used to be the digital director at the ABC affiliate station there. And I was the only guy doing digital, and that actually opened the doors for me to get creative on other things, because I didn't, some stations, they only want their on-air talent to do these special projects. Like, I'm going to do a podcast. Okay, well, this reporter has to host it, or I want to do, this on Instagram. Okay, that's fine, but you got to have the on-air talent voice it. I mean, to me, that's, it kind of spoils the creativity of that person. And it's not like I like being on camera or anything like that, but I just think that if you have an idea in your head on how something's going to go, then you really have the passion for it, and that'll come through or shine through the project for anybody watching it or hearing it. And if you get somebody else that's just doing it because they've been ordered to do it, you might not get that passion coming through.
I agree. And it has been a little bit of a challenge for me, because people want to say, well, are you a news person, or are you music for radio? Is that what you do? And I guess maybe not a lot of people have that crossover, but I'm passionate about all of it. I love talking to people. I love talking about what's going on in the community, who's doing what kind of activism, love music as much as life. So I like doing all of it, but it is a little confusing when I've had an agent, when there used to be agents for radio, and they're like, well, what are we going to market you as? They really want to kind of pigeon you and get a direction and narrow it down. And I'm not a very narrow person. So I say, well, why not bring it all in? And that's what you do. And that's why I started following you when you were in Santa Barbara. I thought, oh,
thank you.
God, who's ever doing the digital stuff? This Oscar cat got something.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I got to give it up to my bosses too and the team that allowed me to do that, because I've worked for stations that won't let you do that, and when you got bosses that let you shine, then you really are going to get really cool things out of that person. So as
Sorry, I was just going to say that was another thing when I've always believed in playing to people's strengths. Don't say, when I was working as news director, I had a producer who told me once, he said, well, when this anchor goes out to report, he's not that good at this and this and this. And I said, well, but he's better at what he does than anybody else. So let's have him do what he loves doing, that he's best at, and we'll find somebody else who's great at what he's not great at and loves doing that. I think if you play to what people love and play to their strengths and not try to spend so much time focusing on what they're not great at, I think you get a lot further and you have happier employees. And that sounds like that's what your bosses did.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. So I want to talk about how you are as a boss. Because everybody, when I was thrown into becoming a manager, I had no idea how to be a manager. I had other people that I could turn to and ask questions and everything, but I just had never had any managerial experience until I became a digital director. So I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to be, but yeah, how did you end up becoming a manager, and then eventually a news director that has the passion for allowing people to be themselves as well? How did you end up doing that, and what motivated you to be that type of boss or manager?
Oh gosh. Well, Oscar, because we've talked about this, I'm not great at talking about myself, but I'll give it a whirl. Many things. I think, when I worked in Washington, D.C., and I worked for NBC News Radio, and I got to work with the people, as far as I'm concerned, at the top of the news profession, Lester Holt and Kristen Welker and their news team, and some people at MSNBC. They have such grace about them. I never, ever had an issue with any of them. They all had different personality types. You find out what they want, what they need, what makes them comfortable. When I was producing for them, and I was also their fill-in anchor if they had to pull away for a TV hit, I stepped in as the anchor for radio, and I wrote and produced their top of the hour hits. But they were so gracious and always so nice, and under some very stressful circumstances. Kristen Welker, she's at the White House waiting to do a TV hit, and I sent her the script for the radio hit. And she didn't have to do this, but she took the time after we did the hit to oh, it's your puppy.
Yeah, he's getting all antsy because the garbage men are going around picking up the trash and recycling bins.
Oh, good dog. Good dog.
Yeah.
But so I was just going to say, Kristen took the time to just say that she liked the script. Nice script. Just a compliment. And those are the people that don't have to do it. These people could be awful if they wanted to, but they don't have anything to really prove anymore. They're where they want to be. They've always focused on where they want to be. Always look up, not down. And, I was a news director before that. And I think just probably working for other people who did appreciate playing toward your strengths and didn't sometimes, to learn. When I was news director and I would do a call, first thing in the morning with who's going to cover what story, our stringers, I kind of got to know their personalities, and I would think, oh, this person is going to be interested in this subject, I'll check with them and see if that's what they want to cover today. I think as long as they're interested in what they're covering, and sometimes you have to cover the stories that just need to be covered. But I think that's very, very helpful to take their circumstances into account. And I even had a stringer who worked, I guess I can say this. She worked as a stripper part-time and worked as, and she had a journalistic background and worked as a journalist part-time. She made more money as a stripper, which is not a good light to shine on our industry. But that's what she did. And I took some heat from some people saying, well, why are you employing her? Because she was a good journalist. I didn't care what they did outside of work, as long as it was legal and, do what you need to do. And as long as you're doing a good job for the company, then I'm happy. And having worked here in the States, and I also jumped on a plane and went over to Indonesia and helped start the first American jazz station in Jakarta and got to experience things ground level there. I think maybe just experience, but life is short. None of us have time for baloney, if I may steal the line from Veronica Corningstone. That is baloney. So, I think just approaching it from that aspect, people who are working their butts off to do a job deserve respect and deserve appreciation.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of aspiring journalists are not. No, maybe they are told now, but for the longest time, I would meet aspiring journalists that they thought that they were going to be getting paid a lot, even in their first job as a journalist. I mean, even if you get to a top market, it's not the same anymore. And
no,
so the money, you're not going to be a millionaire if you're working in news, unless you're, I don't know, like national news anchor that has been doing it for years or something like that. But for the most part, journalists don't make a lot of money, and you have to find a second job. I met so many that had to get a second job because they were in a small market and they needed to pay their bills.
right.
I've just never heard of anybody doing anything illegal, which is great. But a lot of people have to get second jobs. And then they often say, people that know they're not getting paid a lot, but are still giving that their all as reporters, anchors, and people behind the scenes as well, like producers and writers and assignment editors. They do it because they love what they do, and that was the case with me. I stayed in my hometown station for over a decade because I loved doing what I did in my hometown, and the reward was often praise from the community, and I love that aspect. It just kept me going. Time and time again, I would wake up and just say, all right, well, let's go and do this. I didn't really care too much about the money as long as I could pay my bills, and that was it. I didn't expect to get rich out of it, but
we need to support our journalists.
Yep.
I saw a story in the LA Times a couple of months ago that I thought was brilliant. It's just so well written and so well put together. And I sent the journalist who wrote it an email just of appreciation, and she wrote right back. She just loved getting the feedback. I think it's not a good commentary on our society, and might be intentional, that the journalists who are keeping us informed as a nation across the world have to get a second job to do their job. I think personally, we should be paying them more. They should be able to pay their rent and their expenses while they're, holding truth to power or informing us about our communities. Anything like that, I think it's invaluable.
Exactly.
And to buy pretty masks. We need money.
Exactly. Yeah. There was a time when I started as a news photographer. So there was a time when I bought my own wildfire gear, and it wasn't cheap, but, I had to do it. Nobody else was going to get it for me. So I did it, and I got to cover some wildfires out there that, were just nuts. But I had the gear at that point.
Your protective gear, the things you needed to survive, or what you needed to do the job?
Well, what I needed to do the job, and I guess maybe survive a little bit. There was a case of a photographer that went into, and I forgot the name of the fire. But it was it broke out in Montecito. Why am I blanking out on the name? But anyway, it was pretty intense. And he went out there with a reporter, and he didn't really have any gear at all. So he ended up getting an amber in his eye because it was so windy, and he had to go to the eye doctor. I mean, fortunately, it didn't. It wasn't as serious as we all thought. But still, it was a very scary moment. And that's when I realized, I don't want to be put in that spot. And I know that the company needs to get it for me. And if not, then, they're going to get in trouble and all this and that. But I felt that I needed to get the stuff that I needed to protect myself, and not depend on the station. And many of these stations don't make much money anyway to begin with, but when you're talking about the safety of somebody that is doing a job for you, and they're going out there and just putting their lives on the line, then you got to get them the protection. But unfortunately, a lot of times these reporters don't get the safety or the protection that they need. In my case, I just felt that I needed to do this for myself, because if I depended on the station, by the time I got something like some safety gear or whatever, it might be too late. And I didn't want to have to get to that point in order to prove a point.
You have to take care of yourself. You can't rely on anybody else or a company or anything to take care of yourself. And you absolutely did the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And as a boss, or as a news director, when you had to send crews out to cover something, what were some of the precautions that were just always in the back of your mind when you did that?
Well, I didn't really have crews. I mean, I ever saw we had 6 stringers,
mm-hmm.
and I just always told them, you're more valuable than the story.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in danger, get out. We have enough resources now to where we don't have to lose you for the story or for you to be in danger. And things can happen unexpectedly, but especially now, and I'm not a news director at the moment, but given the climate of what's happened politically with journalists, sometimes it can be the public that's the problem rather than the story that you're covering.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to rely a little bit on the folks, your colleagues who are out there to help,
mm-hmm.
but always keep yourself first. I've never gotten upset with anybody who said, I went in to get this, it was too dangerous. Then you step back and you cover what you can. And it's always, the facts are the most important thing, especially, if you're giving information that's very important for somebody to get out of a fire, what roads are closed, what are open, where the fire department is it spreading, which directions the wind is going. You can do that for a little bit of a distance if you need to. But again, I've mostly worked in radio, a little bit of TV, but mostly radio. So we also don't have to get the shot like you do when you're in television, where you might have to get closer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and have you ever been asked to do something that you're not comfortable with in the news industry?
Oh, yeah. Um, where do we start? The thing that I'm the least comfortable with is speculation.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather go with saying, this is what we know right now. If there's a train crash or something like that, this is what we know. Rather than speculation of we're hearing, people are saying. I was told once when I was working for a network on the East Coast, they wanted to get their point across. The network had an agenda, and that's sometimes a problem with the networks and news organizations. Sometimes they have their own agenda. And I said, well, who's the source on this? And they said, just say people are saying. I had an issue with that and had to, fight back against that because I want to know what people. Who are their names? Where are you hearing it? Well, we're seeing it on the internet. Okay, well, show me where you're seeing this on the internet. Is this propaganda? Because I do stand firmly with that. People have to trust where they're getting their news. And I would rather go with what we know rather than it could be, it might be, or people are saying. That's the most important thing. And coffee. We need to have enough coffee.
I'm always reminded of this one line and scene in the movie Scarface with Al Pacino when there's a meeting between him and the guy that he went with, which was supposed to be like maybe the leader, the one that was supposed to be leading the meeting, and Al Pacino was just supposed to be there as an observer, really, companion. But the drug lord that they were meeting at some point went on a little walk with Al Pacino's character Scarface, Tony Montana, and all of a sudden you see this helicopter, and they look up, and it's the guy that Al Pacino came with, and he was basically killed by dangling him off the helicopter, and that really was unfazed to Al Pacino, Scarface, and he says at one point when the drug lord asked him, why shouldn't I kill you like I killed him, and Al Pacino's response was because my what did he say? My word is why am I blanking on this? It's like a famous quote, but yeah, he basically said like my word is my promise to you, basically. Yeah, my word counts for a lot. And that's the one thing that comes to mind when I'm faced with certain situations where the information or the source is sketchy, and I got to decide, well, do I go with it or not? And I'm always reminded, well, my word is my reputation. If they can't trust me with it and what I'm reporting, then that doesn't make me any better than the so-called media that perpetuates falsehoods. And I have experienced that in my career very recently too. But just a few days ago, there was a story about a crane that fell down on a house, and the word going around was that this was a movie set crane that the heavy winds had toppled into this house, and it wasn't part of the movie shoot. It wasn't part of the scene. It just happened. Now that may have been so, but the source that I was seeing this from, the way they were presenting the story themselves, made it sound, at least to me, that they got it off the police scanner. And I didn't see any other source that validated what they were saying. And so for me, I just thought, well, I'm not going to do this story at this point because it's most likely the information that is out there is most likely coming from the police scanner. So I'll pass on that until I can get more clarification later. Some stations went with it. I decided I wasn't going to, and eventually we got things sorted out, and we reported it when we reported it, and that was good. I mean, I've always said that I'd rather be second with the facts and correct information than first with a lot of falsehoods in there.
Right. Well, there are places that believe it's okay to you need to be first, and it's okay. We can correct that later. But I think it makes so much more work for the public, for the listener, the viewer, to go, well, is this right? Well, do I have to check for updates? Are they going to recant that story? Why not just, give it a beat, say, this is what we know, and we'll update it later and be the first one to be right rather than the third one to correct.
Exactly. And I think that played right into the hands of the previous president.
Yeah.
And when he was calling out the media, I think, he wasn't, it's not like he was lying 100% on things in respect to the media. And again, I'm saying that out of experience. I think there's certain practices that some managers, owners, some stations do that really played into this whole fake news thing that now all the media has been kind of grouped into. So, how do you get out of that mindset? How do you get the public to trust you if you're being grouped with everybody else that's perpetuating falsehoods?
It's an excellent question. I think what the former president did was use a great manipulation, which is find one grain of truth.
Mm-hmm.
And the grain of truth was that, yes, some stations, some owners will try and manipulate the truth to get ratings, to get people watching. And that started a long time ago with little things and especially clickbait. I mean, now there's just clickbait all over the internet. And so he used that one little kernel of this happened sometimes. And it's not a new manipulation. It's been used many times before. This is on in the playbook of manipulations. I think we have an absolute duty to the public, to the world, to give correct information and not waste the listener and the viewer's time with misinformation. And I think the companies need to step it up, but it might cost them ratings. He got a lot of ratings for a lot of companies, and that's one of the reasons he got so much airplay and attention when he was running for office. So I think one of the biggest problems I see in the country is greed. Sometimes you have to let some things go to keep your soul. And so if you pay your journalists, let a few bucks go. Maybe the owners of these networks don't buy a new jet this year, and we get some of the public's trust back again.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer your question?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. There's a lot of things that I think companies can do to bring more trust from the public, and that what you mentioned is definitely a huge one, if not the number one thing that they can do. So do you see anything that now versus when you first started your career that tells you that stations are just, or that news is becoming more commercialized, or that there are signs that there may be going back to the way it was before?
Well, that's a good question too. I think the cutting of the news staff and paying people less is definitely a problem. There are very few editors even left. And I think we need editors. I'm not just saying that because I'm an editor, but and because I can catch a typo at 100 yards. it's a little bit of a tick for me. And I see it all over social media. And I think if you don't reveal your source on something and it's just perpetuated over and over and over again from different platforms without saying where this came from, whatever study it is the professor who's saying this? Is he being paid off by a pharmaceutical company? The investigative journalists, I think, are incredibly important. And again, they need to make a living and to have a second set of eyes on a story as an editor, to have the newsroom staffed, to not have, 5 or 6 companies own all the media outlets, and to not base everything on ratings. I think the social media and the internet plays key roles in both positive and negative. It's giving voice to things where we didn't have voices before. I follow a woman, an actress and an activist, Jameela Jameel, I think is her name. I always mispronounce it, so forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it. She's incredible. She's talking so much about women's issues and things that you might not have ever heard before. And you love to watch her because she's so incredibly eloquent and she pulls no punches, and she posts live on Instagram, and she gives her sources, and she interviews really interesting people. And we wouldn't have that otherwise. I believe she's interviewed Gloria Steinem. It's Gloria Steinem's birthday today. I'm not sure when this will air, but as we're recording, they have platforms now that they used to have to go through the media outlets to have. They have their own voices, just like podcasts give everybody their own voice. I think that is going to bring us new light and new direction. But I do want the old school media forms to follow suit in that. And again, it definitely has its dark side. I just don't follow the people on the dark side and delete them immediately.
That's great. That's, I think, a good piece of advice for everybody. I'm the same way. I choose to follow good people and not even deal with the negativity and the falsehoods that others may bring. So let me ask you this. So from throughout your career, what would you say is the biggest change to news, to radio now?
Well, I guess this has been going on now for a few years, of course, as you know, since you were the digital manager for these stations. But certainly the online aspect of it, the social media aspect of it. But how many jobs have been cut? Not to go over that over and over again, but I think it's astounding how many jobs have been cut. And the more jobs that are cut in radio, it gets rid of the live aspect. It gets rid of the one-on-one connection between voice tracking and syndication, and no jobs left. It gets rid of that personal connection that I think we really all need, rather than, and I've done this. I've done voice tracking for companies where you record, if you're on a music station, you record your show hours before it's played back. So when you think you're listening to the radio and there's a DJ on there talking about an event that's coming up or what you just heard, they've recorded that hours, if not days ago. It cuts down on how much the companies have to pay that person. They pay them not by the hour that they're actually live and there. And that can cause some problems too. There was a train derailment in the Midwest years ago, and one of the big companies had cut the entire live staff. So there was no one there to cover the train derailment, and it had toxic chemicals on it. But you're listening to something that was voice tracked from another state the day before. I think that's a problem. But again, the internet with, other ways to communicate is filling the gaps in that. So I think those are the biggest changes. I'm trying to think of something positive here for broadcasting. I think, broadcasting did an incredible job though covering the pandemic. I really think they did, from the 24-hour news sites to our local TV stations. They really kept us informed to the best of their ability with that. I don't think there was a lot of misinformation that I witnessed. And, I think there were some good guidelines. I'm glad we had Dr. Fauci on as much as possible to guide us through that. And we have you.
Well, thank you. Yeah. No, I think you're right. And there was a lot of great reporting in the last year that seemed to be just really nonstop. There's something new every single day was happening, and now I'm thinking, I've been kind of living through this pandemic for over a year now. So after everything is all done, said and done, what else are we going to cover? And there was like a really funny skit that SNL did when the previous president was already going out, on his way out, and the skit basically started with all these people that appeared to be supporters of this president, and all of a sudden it turns into a joke when they start saying, "Oh no, like what are we going to talk about now? What are we going to make fun of next? Like I'm so freaking out here. What's going to happen?" So, but I mean, I've been doing news for 14 or 15 years now, and it's pretty much stayed consistent. The way that the news
Right.
is gathered, and like you got your journalism 101 that you have to follow. But I think you're right. One of the things I have seen too is just the growth of digital, but the reduction of staff elsewhere. And that's definitely a shame, because I think the two could coexist fine, but also the case of the newspaper platform dwindling down. I still love looking at newspaper headlines and reading some of these more in-depth pieces. For TV news, you only get, and I think this is the same for radio, you get really short reports, so there's only so much you can pack into these packages or these reports, and one of the things that digital offers, just like the newspapers, is that you can really go in depth into a story. But that requires time. And so unfortunately, sometimes you just can't do it within one shift, and there's no incentive a lot of the times to continue doing that work outside of your shift. But I mean, if you're really passionate, of course, like you'll do it and all that. But that's the one thing that
I agree with you completely that it's if I were writing headlines, and when I worked for syndication with NBC News Radio, it was like a 2-minute top of the hour hit, but you have to read to the bottom of the story. You already know kind of what your headline might be, but sometimes what the story's about is in the last paragraph. And when you are writing it, it takes a long time to suss everything out about what the story really is, what the roots of the story are. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that really inspired me, because we don't always get what is behind the story, what started the story, if we're just doing a half an hour long newscast or something like that, or looking at headlines. Do you see a way to do more of that, or is it just a matter of pay people for their work?
Well, I think that for a lot of companies, they care a lot about metrics. Oh, how many page views do we get today, rather than the quality of the story, and that's a really bad way of looking at things, I believe. one of the things that I've noticed with some companies is that they hire people that are not really news people. They're not journalists. They just know how to post to social media. And so when it comes to writing a news story, they either do fluff pieces or they just don't know how to write well. But these companies hire them because they can pay them as little as they want, and they'll probably do it. But then there's a lot of other people that are also doing digital producing, that are journalists. And if you just I would say if the managers of the companies just let them and give them the space and time to go out and research a story or write up a story or do a story, then they're going to be really surprised of what they can come up with. So I think as long as the journalist gets a space to do that type of work, then we're going to be producing really good stuff that people are going to be benefiting from. But if they're not giving that space and the time, then all you're going to see basically is people going to work doing the same thing over and over again every day, and not breaking out of that cycle. And so you're just at that point getting paid just to put stories up, just to keep those page views up, not because of the output of the quality, if you will. It's just clicks.
Right. I agree with you completely. Lately, mostly, if I watch TV news, occasionally some local news, mostly PBS, or I check a few sites, Common Dreams, Democracy Now!, BBC, where they have some room to get more into the stories rather than just headlines. I mean, we don't have much of an attention span anymore, myself included. So I do understand that, and we're a bit overwhelmed in our society having to work so much just to get things done. But I do think that that reading in and continuing on with the story is important. And there's room for fun stories, because I have such an incredibly inquisitive mind about things that most people don't even care about.
Like what?
Well, I was on the beach a few weeks ago because I've taken to swimming in the ocean. And that's a weird story how I took to that as well. But I do have a wetsuit that I use for ocean swims in the winter. And basically I'm a human flotation device anyway. I could be an ocean buoy in my next career. But I'm out there and I see one of those guys out there, women too, I'm sure, with the metal detectors going along the beach. I'm like, I have to know, what's the coolest thing he ever found? And what does he do with the stuff? So I'm the weirdo that will just walk up to them and ask them these questions. That to me is still interesting. It's not groundbreaking. It's not going to change any of our lives, but it's still interesting. And so just as I go through the day, so many things pop up to me and are interesting.
Yeah, I think I'm the same way. I remember this one time, and there's so many of them, but I remember this one time in particular. I was with my reporter in Santa Barbara, and on those slow news days, it could be really hellish because you're really struggling to find a story. It's not a fun time when you're kind of struggling to find a story before your deadline's up. And so one of the things that I used to do with my reporter was if we couldn't come up with something at that moment, we just needed to clear our heads. So we would just drive around town and see what we spotted, see if something came up. And so one day we were driving along the waterfront in Santa Barbara, and we saw this person just walking on this line that was tethered to two palm trees, and I forgot what it's called. There's a name for it. But we were really curious because we had been spotting this type of activity for a while.
And it was
Well,
like a rope tied
it
to
was,
it.
yeah, it was kind of like a tight rope, slack. I want to say maybe slack, but it
Yeah.
was like a tight rope that was attached to two palm trees along the waterfront, and the person would just balance themselves in there. I guess it must have been good exercise to just figure out how to balance it. But the rope was a few couple feet above the ground, and it was just really interesting, really curious, because we had been noticing that it only happened at the waterfront. We didn't
Hmm.
notice it anywhere else. So this one day. We just decided to stop and talk to the person and see what they were doing and why, and we actually turned that into a story. It's
Oh,
not your big heavy hitter story, but it was something that's really interesting. And I always have appreciated these long informed pieces if it's something that's really interesting. If it's like a homicide that happened somewhere, I don't need page after page of a storytelling of an article. I kind of just want to get to the point and of what happened. But then there's these types of stories like the curiosity you mentioned of, well, okay, so there's a man with a metal detector. What do they do with that? How does it work? So if there's an article that explains that, I can really get into things like that.
yeah.
And that's kind of what I strive for sometimes with the work that I do, but also with these podcasts. I actually never take notes when it comes to these podcasts. I just let the conversation flow and see where it takes me, because one of the things is I'm curious. I'm just curious about finding out who the other person is, and a lot of the times, actually, I would say maybe 100% of the time, there's really something interesting about that person. Like, for example, I interviewed these ASMR artists. They
I
call them
listened to
ASMR
that.
artists. Oh, yeah. What'd you think?
I didn't even know what it was. So that was brilliant for me. I'm like, well, I have to know what that is. I've never even, am I the only person who didn't know what it was? And it was really interesting. I
Yeah.
loved it.
You can spot them all over all over YouTube. But the interesting thing that I've noticed just recently in the last couple years is that now commercials on TV are playing to that type of audience. Just today, actually, I was watching this commercial that played on TV about Wawanisa, which is, I think, a bank somewhere in the country, or Wawanisa Insurance, they called it. And so they won this JD Power Award. But the whole commercial was this nice whisper and little sounds that produced like a nice, relaxing and tone for whoever was watching that. So even now, I think ASMR has gotten into the mainstream media. I mean, I even saw one of my favorite shows, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and there was an episode where Andy Samberg's character actually plays an ASMR artist. So it's really interesting, and I just have been noticing more of that on YouTube, and that's what made me want to reach out to somebody that does that and find out what it is and why they do it. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was going to say, I found it fascinating. I listened to the entire thing. And the woman that you interviewed, who used to be a model and an actress and has the beautiful accent, I forgot where the accent was from. And just the fact that she's now moved to, I think, the Midwest and is doing it from there, and the different microphones she used and how she started. I agree with you. I mean, I'm just naturally fascinated by all of that. Like the story in the LA Times I'd mentioned about the DDT barrels and the fact that they were dumped off the Catalina and the effects they could be having on the ocean. The more you read into that story that was in the LA Times, the more the journalists found the records, the shipping records, when the ships went out with the DDT barrels, and pulled the covers on the whole facade about how this went down. And one of the people that found the Titanic went out on this mission and got actual footage of these DDT barrels at the bottom of the ocean off the California coast. I couldn't stop reading that story because it was so well done. So, Oscar, my question for you:
Mm-hmm.
Are we freaks of nature? Because I don't know if there are a lot of people who feel this curious about things, or if it's just people who this line of work is a fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes a special type of person to even want to do these types of stories. But I think there's a fascination too with the curious, the weird, especially. I mean, I was kind of glued to this story about this local guy in LA that found shrimp tails in his cinnamon toast crunch cereal.
I didn't
And
hear about that one.
yeah, I was
Wow.
yeah, it was crazy. And so he went there was this tit for tat with the company Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Excuse me. And so this guy posted the pictures and a caption saying, "Hey, this is what I found my Cinnamon Toast Crunch," and totally looked like shrimp tails. And there's no reason for me to doubt that there were shrimp tails. I mean, you can see it with your own eye and know it's shrimp tails, but the company kept denying it. And I thought, okay, well, I mean, I guess that's the end of the story. Well, not quite, because then the following day there was another exchange between this guy and the company, and yeah, it was just a really bizarre situation. But not only that, you thought the shrimp tails were the only thing. Well, I think later, either I can't remember if you posted video of this or if it was a picture, but you could see what appeared to be dental floss inside an unopened bag of cinnamon toast crunch from the same package that he had found these shrimp tails.
So you can get the shrimp tails out of your teeth afterwards with the dental floss? I mean, was that like a prize inside or something?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, how does that even happen? That's the one thing that nobody has answered yet. How in the world does that happen? Especially in two different bags. He bought the package at Costco, and at Costco, they sell in bulk. So this particular package came with 2 Cinnamon Toast Crunch bags. And the one that he showed off with the floss, that one actually was closed. And the other one, he claims that he opened it and he was looking through it or trying to serve himself some cereal, and then he saw these shrimp fishtails, and the company basically was arguing that well, that didn't happen at our facility.
Were they claiming that he might have put them in there, because sometimes people do plant things and
yeah, it kind of sounded like that. And the guy, again, I just have no reason to believe he would be lying about this, because he says that he had been eating Cinnamon Toast Crunch since he was a kid. It was his favorite cereal. So why he would do this, I just don't see a point.
Right.
But the company, regardless, said, well, this didn't happen at our facility. Okay, well, somehow between the factory where they're doing all the packaging, all the cereal, and when he got to Costco, there was something that happened.
Yeah.
So what was it, and how did it get there, and who did it? So I can totally see somebody following up on this story. But these are the things that I think we need more journalists to do. Kind of follow the story more in depth. Don't just kind of touch the surface and, all right, well, that's it. I know a lot of companies, that's their MO, because that's just how they operate, especially the traditional media with newscasts. That's how they do. You do a story one day, and the next day you got to go on to the next. And a lot of the times there's no follow up to things. And if there is a follow up, it might just be a quick little blurb or update on the web, but maybe not necessarily the newscast. So that's just my point of view on some of these things that are happening.
First of all, he might need to wean himself off Cinnamon Toast Crunch at this point. I think that would be a smart move. I don't know
Exactly.
that I buy more of that unless there's maybe a toothbrush and toothpaste in the next bag. But so is that kind of what you do, in a sense of that if we see a story on the news This was found in Cinnamon Toast Crunch, because that would drive me crazy. That's like an itch in the middle of your back that you can't scratch when no one's around.
Yeah, exactly.
That where did they come? So I would have to go on the internet and Google the story and try and find out more information. And if there's not more information, then I'm upset that they got me interested in this and left me without any answers. Not that there's always answers. Sometimes there's not. And that's the story, that there are no answers. When I was in one city in the Pacific Northwest, and I first got there and started working for a station, and they were talking about how there is raw sewage flowing into the river that runs through town. Mm-hmm. And I was there late, way after I'd gotten off the air. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a big story. And so I called the appropriate people and got the quotes and all of that and had it prepared to go out over all the radio stations. And then the news director, because I just moved to that city, went, oh, that's not a story. That happens every time it rains. Mm-hmm. And I said, isn't that the story? That it happens so often that it's no longer a story. But she didn't think so. So I guess we had different opinions on that. But yeah, I always need as much information as possible. So mm-hmm. Do you do that? Do you go onto your platform and invest the shrimp tails in the cinnamon toast? I always say cinnamon toast crunch.
Well, I wish I could say that. Yeah, I do. But I really don't. I have to move on to the next thing and focus on that. And that's what I mean when I say that at some point it just becomes a routine thing. You have to deal with a certain workload that doesn't really allow for time to go out and really do in-depth research on certain things like this story. And there are other digital teams within the company that could focus on that might focus on stories of that type. But there's always, I always believe, just coming from a local news background for so many years and doing that in a small market, that there's so many good, cool things that happen in the community that always have a good story. One of the things I noticed back in Santa Barbara was all these little libraries started popping up. And at first, we didn't know what the heck was going on. We didn't know who was putting them up or just what it was. And now they're fairly common all over the country. But at the time, we're just so curious, and we tried to do a story on it, and it takes time. It really does take time. And fortunately, we had some time every now and then, especially on those slow news days, to kind of focus our attention into that. But in LA, because a lot of stuff happens in LA, there's always activity going on that you have to kind of focus on, and all of a sudden your shift ends, and that's it. The next day you have to move on to other things, and maybe if there's an update to a bigger story the day before, then you do that. Every now and then I do bump into something that's happening. Like one day out in LA, I was driving along Ventura Boulevard, and I get an alert on my phone saying, "Oh, there's a fire at this address," and I was probably about 2 blocks away. So I just drive there, and kind of brings me back to my photog days. And so I park, find a way to get as close as I can, and then I fire up my phone and do a Facebook Live, and before that, as I'm going there, I also look up some information, just whatever dispatch is putting out and whatever I'm seeing with my own eyes, and I just talk about that. And so that's always a lot of fun for me. But also there's other things that I may just bump into as an accident. Like, for example, one day I just felt like going and getting a donut, and there's a great place that I love going to called Blinky's Donuts. It's over in Woodland Hills, and they always have all these nice looking donuts. So I go there every once in a while to get a coffee and a donut. And this one day that I went in there, it was close to the elections, 2020, and they had Biden donuts and they had Trump donuts. and it was so much fun because they also had a board that they kept score of which donuts sold out that particular day leading up to the election, and on election day, whichever donut sold more, then I guess that would be the winner for that donut shop. And so it was just a lot of fun. It's just a lot of community interaction with it. And some people bought it so they could just burn them up or throw them to the trash or whatever. Others they ate the donuts. And I mean, it was just like a fun thing that they had going on, but it wasn't really widely advertised. And I wrote up a story on that, and so I took video and I took photos and I talked to the owner and had some, if I had some follow-up questions, I knew how to reach her, and so I did. And all of a sudden I did this story on that, and I was fortunate enough that I was allowed to do it. And I just did it on my own time, and I was already there, so I figured, well, I might as well just get the information here, and just kind of sit on it until I get to my shift. And again, it comes down to sometimes there might not be an incentive to do anything outside your shift because you're not getting paid for it. But this I thought was really cool, and with my shift, I found time to actually do the story, and a lot of people were contacting me saying that that's really cool. That's really interesting. In fact, I got praises from one of my colleagues saying, "Oh, that I love that story. That's awesome." So there's definitely an audience for stories like that, as well as just more in-depth information on some of the stories. Might not be a huge deal, but it might benefit somebody. So those are my favorite types of stories, especially those that focus on the community. It's just a lot of fun.
Oh, I agree completely. Same here. Yeah. And especially if you can give interesting nonprofits that do, I covered one that did summer camps for underprivileged, financially, underprivileged kids, and got to talk to the kids and what they loved about the camps and what they wanted to follow up on outside the camps ended, or one organization that was a nonprofit that gave all their profits to local animal shelters. And maybe they don't have advertising money. And it's not an advertisement, but it's a story that we feel like this is going on around us, along with the news that sometimes I think is designed to scare us. Mm-hmm. Because it's a very strong human emotion, fear. And sometimes the news companies use it to get us to tune in. But it's not just scary stuff going on around us. It's really wonderful things too. And those things need to be covered.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I would love, I've never worked in radio, but I would love to work in radio. I've always had this impression that it's always a more mellow environment than TV news that can be hectic because there's so many things that go into that. I know we talked a little bit about some of the things that you can find in radio versus TV. Like in TV, you got to worry about the visuals, the live shot. Where are you going to park the live truck? Are you going to call in? Where's this person, or what is digital doing? And it's just so many moving parts. Right. I think that it's great to be a part of, but also environments that are, I think, maybe a little less hectic and chaotic might be also really good environments to produce really good projects, really good journalism. So in your career working in radio, what are some of the things that you really enjoyed about the business?
Oh gosh. I guess, some of the people that I worked with are just incredible people. Getting out the information that I had some freedom in some places to go with what I wanted to do. And I loved that. When I met Willie Nelson, he was at a station to do something completely different. And I was introduced to him, and I knew he was, if I approached him for an interview, he was not going to want to talk about his music. I think, enough people have asked him about that. So I looked him up, and I only had like an hour notice that he was even coming in for this. And I found out what he was interested in. And it was the horse slaughter facilities in the US. And this was years ago. So there wasn't as much work posted on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And so I approached he and his wife, Annie, who's very sweet, and said, would you be interested in doing an interview with me when you're done with this other thing that you came in for on the horse slaughter facilities? And I have a little bit of a background with horses, so I knew a little bit about it already. And he said, yes. That was just an impromptu thing. I had 1 hour to get all up to speed on how many horse slaughter facilities there are, what goes on with the BLM, the horse roundups, who's adopting, where the meat goes, which, is going overseas. And he did that with me. That was just an impromptu, wonderful moment. And the fact that I did have freedom to get into in-depth issues sometimes, and sometimes not. Sometimes I was doing 3 hours that was just all headlines. There's the interaction with, the people, if you're anchoring with the folks that are out in the field, there's just fewer and fewer people who get paid in the business. And sometimes there was a lot of pressure when I worked in DC, and the broadcast is going out on 300-400 stations. If there's a snafu, if there's a split second of dead air, you're going to hear about it from all the program directors at all those radio stations. I didn't really mind that type of pressure, actually, because I'd like to get things right anyway. So, there was a lot of that, and giving people voices who might not have had a voice, which they're, again, with the internet and social media, more people have voices, but it's fun. I still love listening to NPR, and the array of what they have on the air is really interesting. And being able to go to Indonesia and help start the first American jazz station was fantastic. Just being able to experience that.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about that, because that's really interesting. So how did you end up doing that?
It was a fluke.
I love flukes.
Like most of my career, it was a fluke. I was doing some jazz radio in Santa Barbara, and it was at a time where radio people still had agents. Now it's only like the 10% of radio people have agents. The people who are really making money are very high profile. And I had an agent, and they got a request from someone who Suharto was in power then in Indonesia. And his right-hand man loved jazz, would hire, he actually owned 2 jazz clubs in Jakarta. And he wanted to start the first American jazz station. He was looking for a jazz DJ, somebody who knew the music. And she said, are you interested? And I said, absolutely. I was barely making any money. I think my job paid $7.50 an hour then. And a lot of the most interesting things have happened in my life where I've said, what if I have to lose? And that's not always a great place to be in, but it was then. And I was young, and I said, I'll go. And they bought my plane fare, and I flew over and helped pick out the music and was on the air a little bit and stayed in a hotel while all of this was going on. And it was just absolutely fascinating to experience a completely different culture and still everyone's love of the same music. And they were so kind at the end of that they paid for me to go to Bali for 2 weeks. That doesn't happen in American radio. They might pay for a cheeseburger. If you're lucky, and I'm a vegetarian, so that doesn't even really work out. But that's how that happened. And, and then I got to experience Bali, and it was fun.
How long were you there?
It was just under 6 months that I was there.
Wow. That's, I was thinking like you were going to say maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh,
I wasn't expecting that long. So, okay. So how was that experience living there, and how was the culture there? What about the food?
Yeah.
Especially the food.
Again, I was young, so I was more adventurous. Since it was a very different culture where women almost always had men with them. And I was in my 20s, and I had very blonde, fluffy hair at the time. I got off the plane and I was asked twice, different time, where is your man?
Whoa.
And I kind of felt like a dog, like I was off its leash.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone, when I got outside the airport, they had sent a car for me to pick me up, and I didn't drive. I had, because there were at that time, and I haven't been back since, but at that time there were no lanes on the roads. It was like a 4-lane highway, but there were no actual lanes, and people would just cut around each other and go. And if you got too close to somebody, the driver would stick out his hand and just bang on your car.
Wow.
So that was really bizarre. The thing I first noticed is that I've been addicted to coffee since I was a little kid. I was in Montana when we grew up, when I was young, and they just gave kids coffee. My parents would sit around the table, old farmhouse, drinking coffee, and they're just like, I give Molly some coffee. She's not awake yet. So I thought, there's so much coffee exported out of Indonesia. I thought, I'm going to have the best coffee ever when I get there. Mm-hmm. And what I learned was they export all their best coffee.
Oh.
So the coffee up there is not good at all. And I had to live on that for a while. The culture was very, very different. But I've experienced, sexism, which I really think is changing. And I think the internet, the Me Too movement is a big part of that. I did experience some of that, but they took care of me. There was always someone with me if I went out to the clubs or something. Yeah, it was very sweet people. The nicest, sweetest people I think I've ever met was in Bali. They are just so incredibly kind. And the little airport in Bali where the jets come in and take off and land over the water. Everything I was in radio, I'm like, oh, I've got to hit this time at split second. You miss that runway by a split second and you're in the ocean. So that was an adventure. So, wow. Yeah, I mean, it was fun. It was fun. I have not really kept up on my jazz skills in a few years, but at that time, I knew exactly what songs should follow what song you should use coming out of a break, who played on what album. So it was really nice being an integral part of that. And I love that they chose me to go over and do that.
Consider this your intermission. Here's your chance to go to the bathroom, get a snack, or just walk around a little bit. I told you this was going to be a long interview, but I feel it'll be very rewarding in the end. If you're liking this episode and love the podcast, please consider buying me a coffee to continue creating with your support at buymeacoffee.com/Oscar Flores. Don't worry if you weren't able to write it down. The link is included in the description of this episode. All right, let's get back to our interview. Wow. So you've been, I guess, an anchor, writer, producer, an on-air personality, a news director. I mean, what title out of and what hat that you've worn has been your favorite hat to wear doing all these positions?
Good question. It's hard to say because Michelle Obama said something that I heard about a year ago, in that what you love when you're younger, always give yourself options, because what you love when you're younger, you might not love as the years go by. You're going to change. So what I loved when I was younger might not be as good of a fit for me now. The more you know, the more your passions might change and your direction might change. I think the love I have is, bringing people together, whether that's a story or with music. If you can bring people some joy in just that they can go home and start a conversation with their family of, I didn't know about this store that's doing wonderful things for animals, or there's this cafe that brings homeless folks in after hours and they serve them maybe the food that they didn't sell that day. Those are my favorite kind of stories. And you can really do those whether you're on a music station and playing wonderful music, or, I remember that time when I was in Santa Barbara and no one had heard from Peter Frampton for years because he'd gotten into that accident. And the first show he played was at a little place in Santa Barbara that I went to, and I went on the air at midnight and I met him and I said, I'd love it if you could ever call in to my show. And he did. And I didn't expect that at all.
Wow.
And I was so floored that he called in because, the phone rang and I just thought it was somebody wanting a request. And it was Peter Frampton. And I put him on the air live and I didn't even record it because I so didn't think he was actually going to call, but he was a sweetheart. So I guess I love the surprise moments and the stories that can start a conversation or make somebody think, I haven't heard that song in so long. And then it brings back memories. So I guess the situations where you can learn something along with the person listening when you do an interview that you really didn't know about, or when I listen to your podcast and learn things, those are my favorite moments, no matter what the title.
So when did you start getting into the radio business? If you can just take me back to the very beginning, as they say, every hero has a beginning. So how did you get into the business?
Oh gosh. I had taken some broadcast communication and journalism classes in college. And then mine's a strange story. I started driving limousines in Los Angeles. I'd moved to Los Angeles full time. I'd spent a few summers out here. And I started driving limousines when I was 19. You were supposed to be 21 at that time. And I was the only female limo driver that I knew in Los Angeles. And so I was driving for some great bands. I drove for Fleetwood Mac for a while. And John McVie was the coolest guy possibly that I've ever met. And Van Halen and Ronnie James Dio and people surrounding those, and went to all the concerts. And one day I drove for someone who had this radio internship program. And he kind of helped to facilitate an internship at a station here in Los Angeles. And they had an AM station and an FM station. And I interned for free. And I pulled music carts for the DJs, which were on 8-track at the time, and queued up records on vinyl for, some of the people that are legends, including Wolfman Jack and some of these other people. And I was a kid. And I loved it. It was amazing. And I had no idea whether I could do this or not. So I actually got into it on the music side. And I cut a tape and asked the folks that I worked with there, I'm like, do you think there's anything there? And they said yes. Had they said no, I'd probably have a much better career where I could buy a house in something completely different. But they said yes. And then I worked in different stations with journalists who really had great work ethics, and learned from them and just watched people. When I used to be Jim Bohannon's fill-in on America in the Morning for 2.5 years, there was no how to do this show because he had so few fill-ins. So I had to figure that out by myself. I went back and listened to archives of the show to learn the clock. This is where you break. This is where this segment comes up, and take my own notes and learn how to do it. So yeah, it was really just being in the fire and learning that way is how I did it. I don't know if there's that, that possibility now, given that there's so few live people at stations to really learn from, like I did.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the unfortunate things. Some stations are not even offering internships, and if they do, it comes with all these stipulations. And I remember a time when I first started, I even as an applicant, I got taken around in the news vehicle, kind of doing an informal interview. But nowadays, you can't. There's too much liability in that stuff, so you can't really do that. And a lot of the times, interns might not even have the possibility to go and do certain things that will make him a real, true, or take advantage of the journalism. I mean, the internship, which is kind of learn the ropes. And the moving parts of how things are going on.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced and seen interns not having the ability to do certain things because there's a liability there.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if they're not allowed to do it, how are they even going to learn to do it? And it just kind of defeats the purpose of the internships. And that's the unfortunate thing when you think about it, because I believe that there's still great future journalists out there, but they just have to be given the opportunity. And if you're dwindling the pool of people that are actually experienced journalists in favor of folks that might not be, then yeah, where are you going to draw that wisdom from? I mean, I was fortunate enough that I got to work with some real veterans of news, and that's also how I learned my ropes, and got my news sense, and really improved my skills in my news judgment. I feel really fortunate that I got that opportunity and that experience, but at the same time, I feel bad that it's not the same world, and so people may not be getting that same education. And that's one of the things that made me want to participate in this camp for aspiring journalists called Camp News, and Fox 11's Hal Eisner puts that on every year. But because of the pandemic, we couldn't do it last year. But it's a great camp that gives you really hands-on experience, and I just think it's awesome. Like, any way I can pay it forward, so I can teach the new generation of journalists how to do things. I love doing that, knowing that they might not get it elsewhere otherwise.
Right. I agree with you. It's so incredibly important to have hands-on experience and to have mentors. My first radio job, I lived in Los Angeles at the time, and I got a part-time job in Santa Barbara, and I worked one shift on Saturday, and I literally slept on the radio station sofa at night just in case the program director could give me another shift on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he did, and sometimes he didn't, to get the on-air time and the experience from people I worked with. And I just worked with great people. And you have to make mistakes, give yourself room to make mistakes, and have people who have your back, who say, that's okay. This is how, we need to do it. And this is why. This is why you need to find out who the true source is. This is why we need to word it this way. In Jameela Jameel's podcast, they were talking about wording, how things are worded regarding women in our society and how important that is. And it really caught me. And they were quoting a professor about this that I then, of course, had to look up and look at his TED Talks. And instead of saying something as simple as women are abused more during the pandemic, well, who's abusing them? That's an important part of our language that we've been leaving out in covering these stories. Instead of saying men are abusing women at a greater rate than before the pandemic, rather than putting it on women, and little things like that's important to learn. And you always learn, but it's so incredibly important to have mentors in the business teach you. And I did have a few of those people, and to give back in the community like you and like Hal do, especially, it's so important. So I agree with you. I think times have changed, and there's not as much of that, and I'm not sure where to get it, to be honest.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, same here. I don't know. I don't know what's going to have to change for that aspect to become available again the way it has in the past. But are there any regrets you have doing what you've been doing for so long?
Looking at it from this stage in my life, I probably would have done television more than radio because television pays more. When I started in radio, the idea was to support myself as a woman and to do what I love to do and satisfy my curiosity and all of those things. And you could do that in radio when I got into it. If you worked in a major market, it was always said, if you work in a major market, you will always work. Because even if there's not work in LA or Chicago or New York, the rest of the country is going to be so happy to have you because you've worked in a major market. Mm-hmm. That's not the case now because they hear that you work in a major market and they think you're going to be uppity, or you're going to want too much money, or you might diminish what they've done. I've run into that quite a few times. And when you worked in a major market, you kind of automatically made over $100,000. I knew people who worked in radio stations and music radio stations in Los Angeles for years who made about $300,000. And I thought, this is perfect. I'll be able to do what I love and make a living and not ever have to depend on anybody, which has always been very important to me. That has changed. You can barely make a living working in Los Angeles. There are the few exceptions, but generally speaking, it's very difficult. And most of the jobs in between Los Angeles, Chicago, New York pay very little if you're going to get a full-time job. They'll pay you hourly, or they might pay $20,000, maybe $30,000 a year if you can get the job. So I am at a point in my career, having done mostly radio, where it is difficult to make a living. And I know so many people, Oscar, people that you know who have been on the air in Los Angeles, the major markets, who are so incredibly good at what they do, that they're out of work and they're looking at what do I do now? Because this has been my past as a journalist, as a news reporter in Los Angeles, as a music radio person. It doesn't necessarily qualify you to do a lot of other things. So if I knew then that the FCC was going to be deregulated and that this was going to happen in the industry, I might have chosen another profession. But we didn't know that. And I had the experiences that I have had and met the incredible people that I've had the fortune to meet and to work around. So I don't know that it's a regret because I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. And life can take some tricky turns. And I wouldn't be here talking to you right now had I done something different.
Yeah, that's also one of the reasons why I decided to get into digital journalism instead of staying as a photographer, because I had so many chances to leave Santa Barbara as a photographer and come out to LA, but there was something that I just didn't like besides driving around in traffic. And that's actually one of the things that anybody that's been a photographer, a news photographer, knows that you're probably going to be spending more time driving in the car than you are actually shooting the story.
Truth, yeah.
And so with LA traffic, I was like, no, I don't really want to deal with that. But also the fact that I felt that news photographers was a dying breed, because I saw these stations just start hiring multimedia journalists, people that could report, edit, and just go live by themselves and just do everything by themselves. And they were getting paid the same as a news photographer for the most part. So that's a huge money saver for companies, but doesn't mean that the product is necessarily going to be that good. But that was the direction that a lot of stations were heading and also are still heading in. Even the big boys like to come. I know some stations here in LA that have hired multimedia journalists, as part of their on-air talent. But I felt that digital had many applications, and I don't know why. I just had that foresight that if I went to digital, that if working in the news business just didn't do it for me anymore, um, and I was out of a job, that digital had other applications elsewhere. I mean, there's not one company out there that I can think of that doesn't have a digital component to them. It could be, Coca-Cola, or it could
Right.
be Patagonia jackets.
Good company, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's I think it's based out of Ventura, isn't it?
I think they are. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
They always have some digital component to them
Hmm.
for marketing purposes and other things. So I felt that if I was good at digital and doing projects that involve different technologies, like podcasting, for example, or live streaming, or other things, that those applications would go further than if I was just to stay as a news photographer. And that was my decision behind, or the driving force behind going to digital. But at the same time, because I did have a news photographer background, I was able to take those skills and that background to digital. And so when I would request certain things from the field crews, I already knew what they were going through based on my experience, and I was way more understanding that if I hadn't gone through that experience, when you're asking for something and they don't give it to you right away and they wait a couple hours, well, there's a reason for that. So it just, I understood that world a lot better when he really came down to being a manager. So yeah, I think
That's a lot of foresight and really smart, really, really smart. I mean, one of the things I was thinking of is, again, it was kind of another time, but I thought, well, I'm going to stay in radio because I think there's more longevity there, especially since, there is ageism, but more so with women. And I thought, there'll be more longevity in radio, certainly, than television as I get older. I was trying to have foresight. You have better foresight than I do. But it's true. I mean, I don't think that's ever going to go away. The field that you're in, even if it changes form a little bit, still be the same animal.
Yeah, exactly. So I got very fortunate in that, but also I love just understanding technology and how to implement it. I mean, I don't know much about coding or making up apps or anything like that, developing certain things, but I definitely can grab the technology that's already created and do something wonderful with it. So that I got really fortunate in that aspect. And there was a time I should say I didn't even get my first computer, which was a Mac, by the way. And I didn't get it until I was a freshman in high school. So computers have been out by then for years, and personal computers. And yeah, I mean, I didn't really grow up, I would say, being a big technology guy. Like nowadays I've seen babies being posed with tablets, and they can do crazy stuff with tablets. But I just wasn't one of those people. I didn't get into computers until late in the game, and I was so fascinated by what they could do. And then fast forward 10 years later, and then probably not even 10 years later, but you get the first iPhone, and that's the start of the smartphone age. And now it's come to a point where you can shoot great video from an iPhone that can rival some of these bigger cameras, professional cameras. And so I wanted to see how far I can take that phone. And there's things out there, hardware and adapters that you could get that can really turn your phone into something really incredible, whether it's for podcasting or photography or news gathering. I mean, whatever it is. And one of my reporter friends, he uses that to his advantage, which is amazing. And he also was a late adopter of the smartphones, but he's so fascinated by the technology behind it that he's so curious. And I think that's one of the things that as a journalist, you just don't lose ever, the curiosity to want to know more about certain things. And so that's just been the driving force for what I do.
Someone told me the other day, she's a TV personality here in Los Angeles, a news person, and she told me that there's a new Android phone that's come out where its capacity on the camera is farther ahead than what the TV news stations have. Like it can't even sync up with it because it's so advanced. Like it's too advanced to actually be used. So yeah, it really is amazing. And you do know a lot about technical issues, which is how we're even doing this today, because you had to coach me through it. I still have to learn about it. I wanted to ask you though about social media, because you're on top of that and I'm not. I post pictures of a dandelion. Like, look at this dandelion. It's grown since yesterday. I don't do a lot on social media. How important is that for people in the news business to keep up a social media presence?
Well, it's definitely very important because I have been asked before by news directors, hey, would you mind checking on this person and see how they are on social media? Because part of the job is huge on social media. Now every single reporter out there needs to know how to tweet, needs to know how to post to Instagram and Facebook. And the companies are looking for folks that know how to use social media. That's how you're going to get the job over somebody else that might not be. But
what about the content? Because I really do not like taking selfies. I'm never going to get used to that. I don't like doing it. I like posting about what's going on around me, something that I find pretty or fascinating. So what kind of content do they have to have up?
Preach. I'm the same way.
Really?
I don't really like taking pictures of me and posting them. I know that I have seen some national anchors just post selfies. And I just don't really see the point of that. I mean, it's I guess it's supposed to showcase their personality or who they are behind the camera, but I just don't really see that as necessarily a good thing. I think people are looking for quality of content, in particular Instagram, for example. With Instagram, it's more of a happy-go-lucky place. So I try and stay away from posting anything negative on there, like negative news, murders, homicides, and accidents, and just a bunch of stuff that has a negative connotation to it. I avoid all that at all costs. So that's why if you go to my Instagram, you probably will see a lot more of my passions, like grilling or cooking or trying out food, especially new places. It just showcases my
Your
passions.
Instagram account is delicious.
I'm glad. Some of those things or meals I make myself. Other times I just go to a restaurant and one of the things I love about LA, and Santa Barbara has a ton of these too, but LA just has sometimes hole in the wall places that may not necessarily people may not necessarily know about. You just have to kind of take a chance, and as long as I see that big A outside their doors from the health department, I know I'm good. But
not a lot of great Guinness though.
Yeah. Exactly.
There's only a few Irish pubs, very few in Los Angeles who can pour proper Guinness.
Yeah, exactly. I loved Santa Barbara has a really good one. Ventura has Dargan's, of course, and that's one of my favorites. But yeah, my Instagram, that's the type of stuff that you see there. But then you go into my Facebook and my Twitter, and you see a lot more news things. In fact, almost all of it is news. That's how I put out articles that I write, things that I care about to share with folks, information to put out there. So I think, at least in my opinion, if you're going to post something, and depends on the platform, or if you're going to post something, either make it about something you're really passionate about, but in certain platforms like Facebook and Twitter, you got to put down things that you do in your profession as well. So if you're a reporter, you're going to want to share stories that you do, but not just that. You got to also share content from the station, from either other colleagues or the website. In fact, most of the time I'm sharing articles for stories that I think are either quirky or that I feel that the public should know about in my Instagram. And I just kind of pick him and grab him from the website. And then sometimes stories that I write, I put out there too. So all that helps with trying to find that next job. Doesn't necessarily have to be posts about what you're doing or selfies or anything like that, but it has to be content that reflects what you're doing, what you want to accomplish. So if that's news content, great. But if that's also about your passions, that's even better. So it also just depends on the platform.
What are your thoughts on this? It's not a very deep question, but it is one of my quirks. I can't stand typos. So I catch typos in so many things, and I had to challenge myself. There's a radio station up in Portland Radio Project, that's independent. I support that station. I love that station. They posted something against Asian hate the other day, and I reposted it on my Instagram account, and there was a typo in it. And I fretted about whether to repost it because there was a letter left out. And I went to the default of that their message is more important. We know what they're trying to say than one typo. But I did it as a challenge to myself because typos drive me crazy. But I see typos in a post from National Geographic that I follow. I think in the New York Times that I follow, I saw a typo. Is that just par for the course given how much work, how much writing they have to do? The fact that we're working on computers, our eyes get sore. Sometimes we're working on smartphones, and that more typos are just going to happen? Or do you think it is possibly the lack of editors?
Well, it's definitely a variety of things. For example, some people just don't know how to write, period. So those folks need a lot of help, but companies hire them because they feel like, oh, we can just pay them, lower amount than somebody that actually has experience writing and is a good writer. And every now and then companies get lucky and they hire somebody that's actually really good, that may have some experience, but maybe not as experienced as other folks. And I've met people that are excellent writers, and they take pride in their work. But then there's also other moving parts that are, I think, that contribute to errors in articles, and you're right, that comes down also to how much things you're writing and putting out there. Your eyesight might get tired because you're not getting a proper break. You're kind of stuck to your computer because you got to meet a quota. And so you're just typing away and you tend to make a mistake. And so that's why a lot of stations might put a disclaimer at the bottom or a note that says, hey, if you notice a typo, let us know. Or a lot of them are welcoming to comments on social media. So if a reader notices a typo, they could just put it on social media, or there's always an email you can send out to the digital team, and they make those corrections. But definitely it's a combination of it could be people that don't know how to write, and people that may just slip up because they're just tired, or they're burnt out, but they have to stay there for their shift and do the job. And there might be other factors. Maybe somebody's doing multiple things at once, and or maybe it's English might not be their first language, for example, or just for a variety of reasons there might be typos. But I think that if one just slows down and reads back their work and takes pride in that, then they won't want to put anything out there without reviewing it. There have been many times when I've asked somebody else, a fresh set of eyes, to just look over my story and make sure that I didn't miss anything, that I didn't have any typos. And once I get the green light, then I publish. Other times, I just reread my article multiple times before I even publish them. And that's because I'm also not a big fan of typos. And I have made them. I have made typos before, but I always learn, and I learn from that experience, but I always change it, because if I notice it, I won't be able to sleep. I have to just fix it.
Yes, same thing. It's like a weird obsession of, I don't want to be a hall monitor on social media and go, "Dear National Geographic, I noticed in your third sentence, just before the first word, that because that could be incredibly annoying." But yeah, I'm the same way. Typos just drive me crazy, but it is occupational hazard at this point. If one of the glorious things about radio is that if I'm writing my own newscast and it's just headlines, top of the hour or something, I can write my entire newscast in emojis, because I know what I mean. I know and there are no such thing as a typo when you're talking. But in your field, certainly.
Yeah, exactly. Once it goes up there, especially if you have the website set to auto publish a tweet from your caption, from your first paragraph or your headline, and there's a misspelling in there, then if it goes out on Twitter, for example, there's no edit button there. You either have to remove the whole post and start over, or you might want to hide that. But yeah, there's a variety of things, but in my experience, the two most reasons for having a typo is that either the person themselves just don't have the pride to look over their work. They just don't care, and they're inexperienced in writing. They probably just got plucked out of I don't know, some media company, some social media company that has nothing to do with news at all, and they put him in a news environment. So what's going to happen? Well, this person didn't have experience doing news. They just got plucked out of some company that has nothing to do with the news industry, and they expect to be produced news quality content, which just doesn't happen. And so they feel the pressure. So all these little things contribute to creating an error here and there. So I just I always appreciate when there's no errors to things that are put out there, published. But if there are, that they get corrected fast. Because I know mistakes happen, but if you just linger on, if the same mistake is there in the morning and then at night, so all this time passes in between and nobody corrects it, then that's where I have a problem with the organization, and I might just not really trust them as much as if they took pride in correcting their mistakes and putting good quality content.
Right. I agree completely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, it just means mistakes happen, which is, again, why I think we should have a fresh set of eyes looking at everything, but they're not paying attention. And so what does that mean about what they're writing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think a good writer will look over their work multiple times, not just write it up and hit publish.
Yeah.
I don't think there's one person in this world that will not make an error mistake, but the problem is when you just publish that thing without making sure that you've looked over that piece of work multiple times, not just once, but multiple times.
True, because it's often when you're writing, at least this is what I found, you know what the story is, you know what you want to say. So you're kind of hearing it in your head. And even if you write it out in error, you're still just hearing it in your head. You might not catch the mistake,
Mm-hmm.
meaning like a typo, because you know what you meant. So
Yeah.
I do have to go back and look at it a few times. I do kind of miss the days when we used to print things out. When I was in DC,
Mm-hmm.
even though I sent a script to one of the big anchors digitally, I always printed it out because you look at it differently when it's printed.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm doing voiceover work and I have a script, I'll always print it out
Mm-hmm.
and highlight or underline it because it looks different to me when it's on your computer and when it's printed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one of the things that I'm currently doing is handling two stations at once. So I'm handling an English speaking station and then a Spanish speaking station. So I have to write stories, oftentimes the same story in English and in Spanish, and there's a whole different set of grammar rules that I have to get used to for Spanish. Like for example, in English, if you're gonna quote somebody, you end the quote with either a comma and then quotation marks, or a period and then quotation marks. But in Spanish, it's the opposite. So you put your quotation mark and then you put either period or comma or whatever exclamation point you're gonna, or whatever punctuation you're gonna use. After the quotation marks. And so some of these things took a little bit of time for me to get used to, but also I had to make sure that it made sense. So I have to read it multiple times, especially if it's a Spanish piece, because I've been used to just writing in English all these years. So writing news stories in Spanish is relatively something new to me, and even though I am bilingual, I still have to be careful when I'm translating something so that it makes sense, especially when it comes to all sayings. It might not work in Spanish, or Spanish might have their own saying versus English. So I have to adjust for those types of things. And
that is impressive. Honestly, I don't even know how anyone learns the English language. Fortunately, it's my first language, my only language. But seriously, I mean, especially when writing it's incredibly confusing. I think about all the time when I write, how would anyone learn this? And then you're bouncing back and forth between the two languages.
Yeah. It's definitely a challenge. But after a while, certain things get repetitive. There's a lot of stories out there that involve the LA Sheriff's Department or the LAPD, and so you end up using the same type of language with some of these stories because they just happen to be similar to other ones that you've done, and so I've gotten used to saying certain things a certain way. And I mean, I love it. I love doing that, but it gets a little exhausting. When you have to go back and forth, and so that leaves you with little time to focus on other things that you might want to do that might be pretty cool projects. But it's all good. I do love what I do, and I do love writing in particular. I know that I would always get these A's in writing class, right? English writing, back in middle school and or junior high and high school. So I don't know what has made me a strong writer, but I definitely love telling stories when it comes to writing. My wife often tells me that I write way better and more heartfelt than actually saying it to somebody, because I do tend to shy away a little bit if I'm trying to say something heartfelt in person, but I'm really good at writing it.
What opens up more for you when you're writing rather than communicating verbally, that you feel more free to do that?
Well, for one, I have I don't really stumble on my words as much. My brain's working faster than my mouth, so that processing certain things. So I'm able to be clear with my thoughts. I don't have to go back and say, "Oh, actually, no, I meant to say like this." Where if it's up in my mind, I don't type it out until the thought is complete in my mind. And also I feel like if it's in my mind, I don't feel judged because I haven't said anything. Where if you say it with your mouth, it's out there already. And if you say it the wrong way the first time, you can get misconstrued, or you can be made fun of. So I just feel like it's more freeing to me because it's in my mind, and only I know what is in my mind. And I feel like I can articulate better if it's coming out of my mind into typing form
So
rather
do
than
you
saying
have
it.
time then by the time you have the thought, you've completed the thought, and then formulate how you want to write it rather than having to say it live on the radio or something? Is that what you mean? Like you have time to formulate how you want to say it, or it just comes out in writing more clearly?
I think it's both. I definitely feel like I can articulate it better and form it a lot faster if it's coming out of my mind than trying to speak it. So if I don't have anything written, um, it might be a little tougher to form certain things if it's under a pressured environment. Like with the podcast, I never take notes unless it's something very specific that I'm trying to get to or say. But if I was under a different type of environment where I was expecting a deadline or I had to get certain things out there now, then that's when it might be a little tougher. But I have done certain things in the past that have been under pressure, and it's made me better. Like for example, I remember there have been maybe 2 or 3 times that I can remember where there was a package on the that I had to send into the news, and I only had about 15 minutes to turn it around. So how was I going to do that? How can I put together a whole package with a reporter track, edit it? Those times, though, we were still doing tape-to-tape editing, which is, if you're going to do tape-to-tape editing, it's in real time. So you can't really mess up much. Otherwise, you're going to, go back and do it all over again. It's just not good. So it makes you become a better, more efficient editor, I believe. And so I would be able to put certain packages together in 8 to 10 minutes if all the elements were correct. But knowing that I was under pressure, it's almost like that football game. You got 2 minutes on the clock. What are you going to do? You're still way over down on the other end of the field. And it makes you more aware of what you need to do. So there's always like a mental checklist in my mind, and if, under certain stress, I can go through that checklist and process it really fast and get my stuff out there and formulate it just right. But if I have just the time on just any normal day, I know that I can formulate my thoughts and process it in my mind pretty fast, and then that comes out in typing. But I do go back too. I mean, there's been a lot of times when I type out a few paragraphs and then I think about it a little bit more. I say, well, you know what? Let me change the paragraph here. I think I can say this in a better way. So that happens too.
Do you ever overthink it? Do you ever like rewrite it 4 times and then go back and, I had it the first time?
Yeah, there's been a few times, but over the years, I've gotten a lot better at not overthinking things, because I found that the more you overthink things, the worse they come out. And so if I'm gonna do a rewrite, I probably might just change a few words here and there, but I really don't change full on paragraphs. I write it one way, and then I go back, and then if it makes sense, then I leave it. So I just feel like I've gotten a lot more comfortable and a lot more confident in telling stories through writing, that avoid some of the things like grammar errors and a bunch of rewrites. But there have been times when I go back and I say, well, I can say this better.
Right.
And yeah, and I just rewrite. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing about doing digital, writing articles. Is that you can always go back and update it. And if it's a huge update or a huge mistake, then there's ways of letting the public know, my bad, I own up to it. Um, where in newscasts, for example, when you're verbalizing it, again, it comes down to you say it, and then it just stays. So if you're gonna make a correction or retraction, then it probably looks worse than if it was in writing.
Yeah, it does.
Mhm.
I was on a station in Texas and worked with a great guy who'd been on the air for like 50 years there. He was the voice of news there. And if we made a flub, I always wanted to correct it, and I always wanted to correct it immediately. And he would always say, "Nobody even noticed that. Let it go." But I couldn't. I always, because I really wanted people to know that if we made a mistake, we would voice that, we would correct that. But often it's more of a thing to me than it is to anyone listening. They're probably
Mhm.
getting in their car or walking the dog when they're listening or something and not really paying that close of attention. So but yeah, once it does go out over the air, especially if you're live, then it's more of a thing to retract that or correct it than it is online.
Yeah. Well, and in today's world, a lot of the times, especially in newscasts, some of the stories that are posted or published on the digital side, it could be a story that a reporter is covering, and if they say or do something wrong, and the editor, the digital producer trims that story and attaches it to the article, then that's going to live on for a while. But it also comes down to how good your digital producer is, because if you're aware of the mistake, then it's a little easier to prevent it by not cutting the story, for example, and not attaching it to the article until there's a correction made. And it happens a lot more often than not, where there's either outdated information or information doesn't really make sense with what we have, and it's a lot better to just not even cut that story and just kind of let it live in the memories of people that are watching the
Right.
newscast. But yeah, if you make a mistake and nobody else catches it, and it goes on to be attached to a web article, then yeah, that's bad, because now at that point it's no longer just in the people's memory; it's for everyone to see multiple times. I think that's how a lot of late night shows get their content.
Right.
Yeah,
That's true. Yeah. Well, I'm sure they're appreciative.
yeah, exactly. Um,
Mm.
well, Molly, it was a real pleasure talking to you, and I just want to leave you with a last word. So anything that you want to say, or anything you want to ask me as well. I just want to give you the last word here.
I always have questions for you. I'm very appreciative to you, to Hal, for the new platform that you guys are working with, Clubhouse, that you invited me on. And I think it's very important. I just think it's very important to cover the media and to cover what we're doing and our
Mhm.
society. And we're under very stressful times, and change is happening at such an incredibly rapid pace with everything that it is an exciting time to be covering things and to be in the mix. And I certainly do not ever want to discourage anyone from going into journalism. It is not easy to make a living right now, but maybe things will change. And if you're covering great stories and just stories that help us in our everyday lives, stories that make someone laugh or care or just be informed, then you're doing a great service to society.
One of the things that I loved about learning from the mentors that I had was that um, just be aware of your surroundings when you go out and about, because you never know when you're going to find a cool story. It could be looking at a message board at a coffee shop when you go in and get your beverage, and while you're waiting to get that beverage, you might find something cool hanging up there or pinned up against the message board. You might overhear a discussion from somebody. You might see something really interesting at a park or at a beach or wherever, and it's that curiosity. Just having that curiosity will make you want to go and explore and get stories, really cool stories that maybe somebody else might have totally missed. So yeah, I think aligning yourself with a mentor, being also aware, not selling your soul, like you said earlier. Definitely had plenty of that going on recently, and it's, if you stay true to yourself, the possibilities are endless.
Absolutely, and certainly my thanks to the folks who have been staying in the business and really covering the really hard issues over the last few years, even though they took a lot of heat for it. Someone like Ronan Farrow, who pulled the covers on sexual harassment, and basically, that started the Me Too movement, has taken so much heat for his work, because you're changing our society. And I don't always have the strength to stand up to heat. I have sometimes, certainly, but it takes a lot of strength, and hats off to those folks who have dealt with difficult administrations, difficult powers, who hold their feet to the fire as well. And, they're my heroes, really, the folks who do that kind of work.
Now, is there something that you would like to explore next? Another type of platform, or what is something that you are really interested in doing, whether it's for a career or whether it's just for a hobby, for fun? Is there something out there that you want to really tackle on next?
Good question. Well, for fun, the most fun I have right now is just swimming in the ocean. And I would do that every minute of my life if I didn't get pruny. But I might look into PR. I mean, I'm still an editor, working, but I might look into PR. I would like to do, just in the last couple of weeks, I've written a couple of press releases that have gotten people attention for friends. They'll send me something, and I immediately go into, if you're sending this into a newsroom, what do they need? They're short-staffed. They're doing the job of 5 different people. They need to know where the story is. What is the story? And so even from a different perspective, I'm still trying to make the job easier for folks who might put this on the air, on the TV, on the radio, wherever it is in print. I might like to do some work for ocean conservancies or anti-poaching, or, folks who are looking after each other in our society right now, and kind of go try and help for solutions rather than just fear mongering, which there is quite a bit of right now. So I might look in that direction.
Molly has definitely collected some very interesting stories along her illustrious career that I can't wait to hear more about. I would like to thank her for giving me a couple of hours of her time to share some of those stories and advice. I've also included a link to my YouTube channel for additional content in the description. If you have any comments or questions regarding this episode or the podcast in general, send them to hangrymexicanpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to feature some of your comments on a later episode. And please rate the Hangry Mexican Podcast on Apple Podcasts and all other major platforms we're streaming on. The more you rate, the more ears this podcast will reach. I really appreciate your support. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay safe, good night, and good luck.